Okay, so today we're gonna learn we're gonna learn APIs. So what are APIs? Especially the reason I wanted to make sure I know about APIs is uh, I use them in my in my company, right? So if you are especially in application building, if you are a tech and entrepreneur, you need to know APIs because they are really important. Okay, they are like the creme, the creme de la creme. Uh, and Some of the APIs, I mean, especially if you're building application, right? So you have to use APIs most in most cases. So they are really important. And let's uh, let's see. So I want to refine my my knowledge of the APIs. So I'm going to ask ChatGPT to do that. Okay, ChatGPT, are you there? Hello, can you hear me? I don't know. The internet
I'm
is.
sorry, but I'm having trouble responding right now. Please wait a bit and try again.
Yeah, it's having trouble responding. We'll go live with Gemini. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few things about APIs. I need to know about APIs to to expand my knowledge base, and I'm going to tell you about what I know about APIs, and you can tell me in areas that needs to be improved. Okay, can you hear me?
Sounds good. I'm ready to talk about APIs. What do you want to know?
Okay, so I'm going to tell you about what I know about APIs, and then you can teach me more. How about that?
Sounds like a plan. What do you know about APIs?
Okay, what I know about APIs is APIs is the term API is actually application program interface. So it allows a system to communicate between each other. So let's suppose, uh, let me give him in the example of my company. My company uses API of Open AI. For instance, if you want to listen to an audio, uh, if you want to listen to an audio of a book, the API will allow you to listen to it, all right? So it does the transliteration, right? Is that, yeah? That's it called, or transcription. So it allows system to communicate. Okay, so I know about a private API. So the private API is you have your own private key. It allows you to authenticate every time you make API calls. The system, when the system,
That's right.
are you there?
So it sounds like you want to talk about how to make sure an API is high quality. Is that right?
Okay, have you listened to my input, or are you just responding?
I heard you. You were talking about API quality. Is that right?
No, I'm not talking about API quality. I'm talking about what I know about APIs, and I would like you to improve, to give me some improvement about if there are some needs that, some knowledge that I need to be added.
All right, so from what you've told me so far, it sounds like you understand that APIs are basically the way different computer programs talk to each other. And you mentioned that you use OpenAI's API, which is pretty cool. Do you want to talk about how to design your own API, or would you rather learn about different types of APIs?
Yeah, I want to learn a different type of APIs. Can you teach me about those?
Sure, there are tons of different types of APIs out there, each designed for a specific job. Some of the most common ones are called REST APIs, SOAP APIs, and GraphQL APIs. Let's start with REST APIs, since they're the most popular. Do you want to hear about REST APIs?
Yes. Go ahead.
All right, so REST APIs are all about getting stuff done over the internet. Think of them like a fancy waiter. You send your order, like give me a list of users, and they send back exactly what you asked for. They're really popular because they're easy to use and work with all sorts of programming languages.
Okay. All right. So let me get this. So the I'm sorry, REST APIs consist of making requests to the server, making an order, and the server will give you a response. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. You make a request to a server, it processes that request, and then it sends you back a response.
Okay. So what's the next one?
Next up are SOAP APIs. They're a bit more complex than REST APIs, using something called XML to send messages back and forth. It's kind of like sending letters instead of just talking. They're still used in some big companies, but REST APIs are more popular these days. Do you want to hear about GraphQL APIs?
No, I wanted to hear about the ones that are relevant.
All right, so REST APIs are definitely the most relevant ones to learn about right now. But there's also another type that's gaining popularity called GraphQL APIs. They're kind of a mix between REST and SOAP, and they're really good at getting you exactly the data you need, nothing more and nothing less. Do you want to hear about GraphQL APIs?
No.
All right,
Okay.
so let's focus on REST APIs. They're the workhorses of the internet, so it's definitely worth knowing about them. Do you want some examples of how companies use REST APIs?
Let's go. Teach me about a different type of API. How about endpoint? Is endpoint an API or just a part of an API?
All right, so an endpoint is basically the address where you send your requests for an API. Think of it like a website address, but instead of taking you to a web page, it takes you to the specific part of the API you want to use.
Okay. So the endpoint is the address of the API. Is that correct?
Yep, you got it. Think of it like the address of a website, but instead of taking you to a page, it directs you to a specific part of the API.
Okay. Very good. Give me an example. I wanted to look to learn more about this.
Okay, here's a simple example. Imagine you're using the Twitter API. If you want to post a new tweet, the endpoint might be something like link to Twitter. You'd send your request to that address, along with the text of your tweet.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so now that we're talking about endpoints, it's a good time to mention that there are two main types of web APIs, REST APIs and SOAP APIs.
Okay. SOAP APIs. Okay. Tell me about SOAP APIs. Oh, I'm
All
sorry.
right, so SOAP APIs are a bit more complex than REST APIs. They use something called XML to send messages back and forth. It's kind of like sending letters instead of just talking. They're still used in some big companies, but REST APIs are more popular these days. Do you want some examples of how companies use SOAP APIs?
Okay. Go ahead.
All right, so one example of a company using a SOAP API is Salesforce, the big customer relationship management company. They've got a whole platform built around SOAP API, letting developers integrate with their service for things like creating new contacts or finding customer data. Do you want some examples of other companies that use SOAP APIs?
Okay. Okay. Explain to me how Salesforce uses their SOAP API.
Okay, so Salesforce uses a SOAP API to let developers interact with their CRM system. For example, you could use the API to create a new customer account, add products to an order, or even send out automated emails. Salesforce actually has really detailed documentation on how to use their SOAP API. Do you want me to find a link to it for you?
No. Let's not go there. Okay. So we want to just focus on the basics of APIs, not you know. So tell me about okay, private API, public APIs, and more.
All right, so let's talk about the different types of APIs. There are two main kinds, public and private. Public APIs are like open doors. Anyone can use them to build stuff. Companies like Google and Twitter have public APIs that developers can use to create new apps and services. Private APIs are more like a secret handshake. They're meant for internal use within a company. You could use a private API to connect different systems you use within your business.
Okay. So in the case of the Google, give me an example of public API. Okay, let's suppose I have a company that uses ebook translation. Can I use the public API?
Absolutely. Google's got a public API called the Google Translate API, which does exactly that. It translates text from one language to another. You could definitely use that in your ebook translation company.
What is the cost? Is it free or it is a paid API? I don't know.
It depends on how much you use it. Google offers a free tier for their Translate API, which is good for testing things out or for smaller projects. But if you need to do a lot of translations, you'll probably end up paying for it.
Okay. So, all right. So for commercial use. All right. So let's move on with the types of the APIs that you were explaining.
All right, so we talked about public and private APIs. There's one other type that's kind of a mix of the two, called partner APIs. These are meant for specific business partners, and they offer a middle ground between fully public and completely private APIs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead. Are you there?
Yes, I'm still here. What else would you like to know about
Okay.
APIs?
Okay, all right, now give me an overview of the APIs.
All right, so we've covered a lot about APIs, how they work, the different kinds, and some examples of how companies use them. Do you want to summarize what you've learned?
Yes.
All right, so we've covered a lot about APIs, how they work, the different kinds, and some examples of how companies use them. Do you want to summarize what you've learned?
I said yes. Yes, please.
All right, so we've covered a lot about it. Okay, so to recap, APIs are basically the way different computer programs talk to each other. They can be used for all sorts of things, like getting directions, translating languages, or even posting on social media.
Okay, move on. Continue.
All right, so we've covered a lot about. All right, so we talked about how there are different types of APIs, like REST and SOAP. We also covered public, private, and partner APIs. Is there anything else you'd like to focus on?
Okay, you can ask me a few questions to see if I grasp some of the concepts that you explained to me.
All right. Here's a question to get us started. Can you give me an example of how a company might use a public API?
Okay, an example of public API is any company that can use the API, right? Available. Let's suppose if Google made an API available to the public, any person can use that API for their services and for their products. Is that accurate?
That's absolutely right. A public API is like a tool that a company makes available to anyone. So if Google released an API for something like their search engine, any developer could use it to build new features into their own apps or websites.
Okay. Another question?
All right, here's another one. Can you explain the difference between a public and a private API?
Okay, like I just said, public API is accessible to any companies to integrate into their services and products. Private APIs are where you have, nobody have access to it, and you have, as a company, you have the keys. It generates keys. It also have an authentication process. When you make requests,
That's right.
Yeah.
You've got the basic idea. The big difference is who can access them. Public APIs are open to anyone, while private APIs are restricted to specific users or groups, usually within a company.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, last one. Let's say you're putting together a website for your friend's new pizza shop. They want to let customers order online. Could you use an API for that? And if so, what kind?
Okay, can you repeat the question?
All right, last one. Let's say you're putting together a website for your friend's new pizza shop. They want to let customers order online. Could you use an API for that? And if so, what kind?
Oh, okay. So API for payment processing, right?
You could definitely use an API for online ordering. You'd need a couple of different ones. One for handling payments, like you mentioned, and another one to actually place the pizza order.
Okay, so in that case, two APIs.
Yep, you'd need two APIs for that. One for handling payments, like you mentioned, and another one to actually place the pizza order. You could even use a third one for things like delivery tracking.
Okay, sounds good. Let's move on.
All right, sounds good. So, do you want to learn about how to build your own API, or maybe how to find and use existing ones?
Okay, let's finish with the questioning first. Do you have any other questions for me?
All right, let's finish with the questioning first. Do you have any other questions for me?
No. You can ask me. You can ask me if I have grasped the concept of the APIs.
All right,
Yeah.
so I want to make sure you really get what APIs are all about. Think of them like a waiter at a fancy restaurant. You tell the waiter what you want, like, I'd like a burger. And they go and get it for you. It's the same with an API. You send a request, and it sends you back what you asked for. Do you think that analogy makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So the other point you mentioned was the endpoint. So the endpoint is actually the web address of the API. Is that correct?
Absolutely. The endpoint is like the specific address within an API. It tells the system exactly where to go to get the information or perform the action you want.
Okay. All right. That sounds good. So I'm gonna give a perspective of an entrepreneur as somebody who owns a startup, a company. I wanted to make it easier for a business owner, somebody who wants to build tech products, right? So if you wanted to build tech products, you need to know the basics understanding of the APIs and also their cost is very important because if you're building a specific company and that the API cost is very high, you may run out of business. So it is because that's the reason why, in my case, I use an API for the listening for the audio from OpenAI, and it costs us
You're
a lot.
absolutely right.
It
The
costs.
cost of using APIs can really add up, especially if you're just.
All right, so it costs us a lot of money, right? So that's the reason why I have to implement a system where we can limit the usage of the API calls, and we implemented that so that we don't get a lot of costs of running the business, right? So it's important that you have to take into consideration the costs of the APIs. So if you're just a business owner, you just need to understand the overview. You don't need to understand the complex technologies. It's not. I mean, you can always hire somebody to do the job for you, right? But it's best that you understand those concepts so that you have a better idea, and especially from uh, financial standpoint, right? What else? So you need to know the overview of the APIs. You need to know their costs, right? And you also need to know what type of APIs do you need. So and which company have the better solutions. So depending on the business that you're building, uh, you have to, you know, maybe you want to build a company that has image generation, right? You want a company to your business, the website to generate image, and that's how you charge your customers. And you wanted to make sure that you work with a company that has the best APIs in terms of the image resolution, right? And also speed. All right. So you can check OpenAI. So you can compare them to see which company had the better product, right? The quality product. And also you take into consideration the cost. And then from there, you'll be able to implement the API. So these few things are really important. I use it from my, I'm speaking from my own experience. I think maybe that my experience will help other people, to make their decisions. If you have any comments, you can leave them below.